When archaeologists dig up the clay tablet records of the later-day Sumerian descendants of the Nodites, they discover lists of Sumerian kings running back for several thousand years, and as these records go further back, the reigns of the individual kings lengthen from around 25 or 30 years up to 150 years and more. This lengthening of the reigns of these older kings signifies that some of the early Nodite rulers, immediate descendants of the prince's staff, did live longer than their later-day successors, and also indicates an effort to stretch the dynasties back to Dalmatia. The records of such long-lived individuals are also due to the confusion of months and years as time periods. This may also be observed in the biblical genealogy of Abraham and in the early records of the Chinese. The confusion of the 28-day month or season with the later introduced year of more than 350 days is responsible for the traditions of such long human lives. There are records of a man who lived over 900 years. This period represents not quite 70 years, and such lives were regarded for ages as very long, 80 years and 10, as such a lifespan was later designated. The reckoning of time by the 28-day month persisted long after the days of Adam, but when the Egyptians undertook to reform the calendar about 7,000 years ago, they did it with great accuracy, introducing the year of 365 days. 3. The Tower of Babel. After the submergence of Dalmatia, the Nodites moved north and east, presently founding the new city of Dilmun as their racial and cultural headquarters. And about 50,000 years after the death of Nod, when the offspring of the prince's staff had become too numerous to find subsistence in the lands immediately surrounding their new city of Dilmun, and after they had reached out to intermarry with the Andonite and Sangic tribes adjoining their borders, it occurred to their leaders that something should be done to preserve their racial unity. Accordingly, a council of the tribes was called, and after much deliberation, the plan of Bablot, a descendant of Nod, was endorsed. Bablot proposed to erect a pretentious temple of racial glorification at the center of their then occupied territory. This temple was to have a tower the like of which the world had never seen. It was to be a monumental memorial to their passing greatness. There were many who wished to have this monument erected in Dilmun, but others contended that such a great structure should be placed a safe distance from the dangers of the sea, remembering the traditions of the engulfment of their first capital, Dalmatia. Bablot planned that the new buildings should become the nucleus of the future center of the Nodite culture and civilization. His counsel finally prevailed, and construction was started in accordance with his plans. The new city was to be named Bablot, after the architect and builder of the tower. This location later became known as Bablod, and eventually as Babel. But the Nodites were still somewhat divided in sentiment as to the plans and purposes of this undertaking. Neither were their leaders altogether agreed concerning either construction plans or usage of the buildings after they should be completed. After 4½ years of work, a great dispute arose about the object and motive for the erection of the tower. The contentions became so bitter that all work stopped. The food carriers spread the news of the dissension, and large numbers of the tribes began to foregather at the building site. 3 differing views were propounded as to the purpose of building the tower. 1. The largest group, almost 1/2, desired to see the tower built as a memorial of Nodite history and racial superiority. They thought it ought to be a great and imposing structure which would challenge the admiration of all future generations. 2. The next largest faction wanted the tower designed to commemorate the Dilmun culture. They foresaw that Bablot would become a great center of commerce, art, and manufacture. 3. The smallest and minority contingent held that the erection of the tower presented an opportunity for making atonement for the folly of their progenitors in participating in the Caligastia rebellion. They maintained that the tower should be devoted to the worship of the Father of all, that the whole purpose of the new city should be to take the place of Dalmatia, to function as the cultural and religious center for the surrounding barbarians. The religious group were promptly voted down. The majority rejected the teaching that their ancestors had been guilty of rebellion. They resented such a racial stigma. Having disposed of one of the three angles to the dispute, and failing to settle the other two by debate, they fell to fighting. The religionists, the non-combatants, fled to their homes in the south, while their fellows fought until well nigh obliterated. About 12,000 years ago, a second attempt to erect the Tower of Babel was made. The mixed races of the Andites, Nodites, and Adamites undertook to raise a new temple on the ruins of the first structure, but there was not sufficient support for the enterprise. It fell of its own pretentious weight. This region was long known as the Land of Babel. 4. Nodite centers of civilization. The dispersion of the Nodites was an immediate result of the internecine conflict over the Tower of Babel. This internal war greatly reduced the numbers of the purer Nodites, and was in many ways responsible for their failure to establish a great pre-Adamic civilization. From this time on, Nodite culture declined for over 120,000 years, until it was upstepped by Adamic infusion. But even in the times of Adam, the Nodites were still an able people. Many of their mixed descendants were numbered among the garden builders, and several of Van's group captains were Nodites. Some of the most capable minds serving on Adam's staff were of this race. 3 of the 4 great Nodite centers were established immediately following the Bablot conflict. 1. The Western or Syrian Nodites. The remnants of the nationalistic or racial memorialists journeyed northward, uniting with the Andonites to found the later Nodite centers to the northwest of Mesopotamia. This was the largest group of the dispersing Nodites, and they contributed much to the later appearing Assyrian stock. 2. The Eastern or Elamite Nodites. The culture and commerce advocates migrated in large numbers eastward into Elam, and there united with the mixed Sangic tribes. The Elamites of 30 to 40,000 years ago had become largely Sangic in nature, although they continued to maintain a civilization superior to that of the surrounding barbarians. After the establishment of the Second Garden, it was customary to allude to this nearby Nodite settlement as the Land of Nod, and during the long period of relative peace between this Nodite group and the Adamites, the two races were greatly blended, for it became more and more the custom for the sons of God, the Adamites, to intermarry with the daughters of men, the Nodites. 3. The Central or Pre-Sumerian Nodites. A small group at the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers maintained more of their racial integrity. They persisted for thousands of years, and eventually furnished the Nodite ancestry which blended with the Adamites to found the Sumerian peoples of historic times. And all this explains how the Sumerians appeared so suddenly and mysteriously on the stage of action in Mesopotamia. Investigators will never be able to trace out and follow these tribes back to the beginning of the Sumerians, who had their origin 200,000 years ago, after the submergence of Dalmatia. Without a trace of origin elsewhere in the world, these ancient tribes suddenly loom upon the horizon of civilization with a full-grown and superior culture, embracing temples, metalwork, agriculture, animals, pottery, weaving, commercial law, civil codes, religious ceremonial, and an old system of writing. At the beginning of the historical era, they had long since lost the alphabet of Dalmatia, having adopted the peculiar writing system originating in Dilmun. The Sumerian language, though virtually lost to the world, was not Semitic. It had much in common with the so-called Aryan tongues. The elaborate records left by the Sumerians describe the site of a remarkable settlement which was located on the Persian Gulf near the earlier city of Dilmun. The Egyptians called this city of ancient glory Dilmat, while the later Adamized Sumerians confused both the first and second Nodite cities with Dalmatia and called all three Dilmun. And already have archaeologists found these ancient Sumerian clay tablets